In Silver Creek, people once thought that silent heroes had long been forgotten by time. But today, a simple moment will make the entire town pause in quiet respect. Where are you watching this video from? I'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy heartwarming stories like this one, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and follow, so we can keep spreading more beautiful things together every day. And now, let's dive into today's special journey. Silver Creek, 10 a.m. Walter Ramsey's battered old Chevy turned onto the intersection of Elmwood and Grant, its aging engine roaring as if struggling to squeeze out every last mile. The cabin was thick with the scent of worn leather, motor oil, and the faint sweetness of a small bouquet he'd bought to lay on his wife's grave later that afternoon. Walter, 80 years old, dressed in a faded flannel shirt, worn-out jeans, and a baseball cap embroidered with the faded words, U.S. Army Special Forces Veteran, sat upright, both hands steady on the wheel. In the blistering June sunlight, he was just another familiar fixture of this small town, a figure most of the younger generation moved too fast to even notice. The traffic light ahead turned red. Walter slowly pressed the brake. At that exact moment, a siren wailed behind him. A Silver Creek Police Department cruiser pulled up close, its blue and red lights flashing. Walter didn't panic or even look surprised. He calmly signaled right, eased the Chevy over to the curb, and kept both hands resting visibly on the steering wheel, just like the training manual said. Two young officers stepped out, tension radiating from them, as if they were about to take down an armed bank robber. Officer Jason Monroe, around 27, blonde with a high-end tight haircut, circled the front of the dusty hood, tapping his fingers against the battered metal. License, registration, or at least a good story, old man, Jason sneered, his voice dripping with mocking amusement. A few steps away, Officer Tyler Hayes, also young, his polished shoes comically out of place on the dusty pavement, stood with his arms crossed, watching like he was waiting for the afternoon's entertainment to start. Walter didn't react. He simply turned his head slowly toward Jason, his blue eyes calm and still as a morning lake. Without a word, he pulled out his old wallet, removed a weather driver's license, and placed it neatly on the dashboard in plain view. Jason glanced at the ID and smirked. Walter Ramsey, huh? This truck looks like it fell out of a war museum. No valid plates, no inspection sticker, and running down the street like the rules are meant for someone else. Tyler chuckled under his breath, half joking, half serious. Bet he's running moonshine. Or worse, smuggling a flock of tax-evading chickens. A few passing cars slowed down. Some people even pulled out their phones, casually filming. An old man being hassled by two young cops in broad daylight. Nothing special, but enough to spice up a lazy summer afternoon. Walter remained silent. He had lived long enough to know that words often blew away like dust in the wind. He kept his calloused hands steady on the wheel, his face as composed and immovable as stone against the tide. Jason curled his lip. "Step out of the vehicle, Grandpa. We need to check the truck bed. Might even have you take a little senior citizen cognition test while we're at it." Walter nodded silently, then opened the door and stepped out. His lean shadow stretched long across the sidewalk, but each step was steady, deliberate. The same steady stride that had once carried him across battlefields whose names these two young officers had likely never even heard. Silver Creek might have long forgotten who Walter Ramsey once was, but he had never forgotten who he was. Walter Ramsey stood tall in the sunlight, his silhouette cast beside the battered Chevy, the faded cloth cap shielding sharp, steady eyes. A soft breeze drifted down Maple Street, carrying the scent of hot asphalt and blooming magnolias from the fence lines. Jason Monroe strode up to him, pen and citation pad already in hand. Tyler Hayes followed close behind, his gaze openly disdainful. Full name? Jason barked again, despite already holding Walter's ID. Walter simply nodded, offering no further response. Jason frowned, flicking the papers with a snap of his fingers, trying to provoke him. "Hey, old man, we're talking to you." Can't hear too good anymore. Not a single muscle on Walter's face twitched. No sigh, no flash of defiance. He simply stood there, unmoving, unbothered. Not because he was helpless but because he had once stared down men with real guns and real hate in their eyes, in places Jason Monroe would never even find on a map. Tyler snickered under his breath. Maybe he thinks he's being detained by some communist regime or something. Jason burst into laughter, a hollow, empty sound that echoed across the sparsely populated street. A young boy on a bicycle coasted past, glancing back with wide, curious eyes. Walter slowly removed his cap. He smoothed back his thinning silver hair, then set the cap firmly back on his head. A slow, deliberate motion, much like the way he used to check his weapon before every drop into enemy territory. No protest, no outrage, no demand for justice. Only calm, the kind of calm forged through years of staring death in the face. Jason stepped closer, dropping his voice into a sneer. You know, at your age, you ought to be at home drinking tea, playing checkers, not rolling around town in that death trap you call a truck. Walter looked directly at him for the first time, not with hatred, not with anger, just a simple, steady gaze, like looking through a pane of glass and seeing, all too clearly, the shallowness hiding behind the pressed uniform. For a fleeting moment, Jason felt a chill run down his spine, though he couldn't explain why. Tyler scratched the back of his head awkwardly, pretending to busy himself inspecting the truck bed, tried to avoid the heavy silence settling between the three of them. Minutes passed. Walter remained where he stood. The sunlight cast deep shadows across the lines etched into his face, but his presence remained as immovable as a mountain. Jason glanced down at his citation pad, then back at Walter, his initial irritation giving way to an uneasy confusion. He cleared his throat. You sit down on the curb and wait. Walter nodded. He moved toward the edge of the sidewalk, sat down slowly, his hands clasped neatly atop his knees, his gaze fixed on the dusty horizon ahead. No complaints, no reaction, and in that silence, Walter Ramsey taught the two young officers a lesson, one they were still a long way from understanding. The harsh scratch of a pen across paper broke the quiet as Jason Monroe jotted down notes. Tyler Hayes shot a glance at the battered old Chevy, shaking his head. Pop the trunk. Let's check it too. Without waiting for permission, Tyler strode over, gloved hands already reaching for the latch. The truck bed creaked open, revealing a mess of odds and ends. A few pieces of lumber, a coil of old rope, a battered toolbox speckled with faded paint, and some cracked sheets of plywood. Jason stepped closer, frowning. What exactly are you transporting here? Stolen goods? Still seated on the curb, Walter answered calmly. Materials to fix Mrs. McKinley's wheelchair ramp down the street. Tyler snorted, picking up a hammer and waving it loosely as if fishing for evidence. Right. Let me guess, you accidentally gathered this from somewhere and slapped a charity label on it. Oh, man. A few townsfolk had started to gather at a distance, pretending to fiddle with their phones, but clearly watching the scene unfold. Jason found a small tin box tucked among the supplies. He popped it open, only to find a few rusty nails and some worn metal hooks. Wow, Tyler sneered, loud enough for his buddies parked nearby to hear. Looks like we've stumbled onto the nation's treasure vault. Walter merely tightened his hands slightly atop his knees, his gaze as calm as a still morning lake. No defense, no argument. Tucked in his jeans pocket was still the receipt from the town's hardware store, clearly printed with the name of the owner, a woman who had once been a student in his volunteer carpentry class 20 years ago. Tyler kept going. What's next, old man? Gonna tell us you're a professional carpenter or something? Jason stepped closer, his voice steady but laced with mock concern. You know, guys your age, they get taken advantage of pretty easy. We're just making sure you're not a danger to yourself or anyone else. The comment made a few people in the small gathering clench their phones tighter. A middle-aged woman in a baseball cap leaned toward her friend and whispered, "That's Mr. Ramsey. He's fixed up half the houses in this town." But the whisper dissolved into the hot afternoon air, unheard by those who most needed to hear it. Tyler rummaged through the front of the cabin, eventually finding an old tin box containing several faded military medals, the only items in the truck that hinted at a past that couldn't be erased. He lifted a heavy metal, glancing at it with a smirk. Oh look, he collects army junk too. Walter stared at the medal, a real Bronze Star, but said nothing. He simply gave the smallest nod, barely perceptible. Jason shoved the medal back into the box and slammed the truck bed shut. No drugs, no weapons. But with this clunker, we've got enough violations to stack up a fat ticket. Tyler jerked his chin toward Walter. Hope you brought your wallet, old man. And so, while Walter Ramsey, a man who had once erected field hospitals under gunfire, who had saved lives of people who would never know his name, sat quietly on the curb, two young officers eagerly scribbled citations as if they had scored the greatest triumph of their day. And they didn't know. The real earthquake hadn't even started yet. Tommy Sandoval, owner of the small gas station half a block away, was wiping down a fuel pump window when he caught sight of the commotion across the street. He squinted, dropping the grimy rag to the ground, and stepped onto the sidewalk for a clear view of the man being treated like a criminal by two rookie cops. As the sunlight cut through the bare maple trees, Tommy caught sight of the worn, faded cap atop Walter Ramsey's head. He nearly blurted out in shock. Walter Ramsey, the man who had once taught Tommy field rescue techniques when he was a rookie at Fort Benning, Georgia. The man who patched a torn tarp and saved an entire platoon during that tropical downpour years ago. Tommy couldn't just stand there. His hand trembled as he pulled out his phone, not from fear, but from anger. He scrolled to a contact, Colonel Dawson, Rhett. Walter's former commanding officer, now retired but still deeply connected in high military circles. "Sir," Tommy said quietly when the call picked up, "he's being detained at the corner of Elmwood and Grant." Walter Ramsey. They're treating him like a thief. A long pause stretched on the other end. "Send me your location immediately," Colonel Dawson ordered. "I'll take care of it." Tommy hung up, glancing around. The crowd was thickening. A few teenagers raised their phones to record, snickering. But among the gathering, several older townsfolk, their faces tightening into grim lines, whispered among themselves, recognizing the frail man as the one who had rebuilt the community church by hand after the massive storm in 1998. Across the intersection, outside the pharmacy, a young veteran stepped out. Wearing a simple hoodie, his forearms were inked with old military insignias. Javier Morales. He caught sight of the commotion, and when his eyes landed on Walter, he froze for a second. Without hesitation, Javier crossed the street, weaving through the crowd, making a beeline for Jason Monroe and Tyler Hayes. "Hey, officers," Javier called out, voice low but firm. "Do you even know who you're dealing with?" Jason turned, raising an eyebrow. "Step back, citizen. Don't interfere with official business." Javier clenched his fists, then loosened them. He crouched down slightly, gently placing a hand on Walter's shoulder, his eyes shining with respect. "Sergeant Major Ramsey." "Sir, if you'll allow it, I'll stand with you." Walter looked up, his faded gray eyes catching a glint of light. He gave a small nod. Javier straightened up, turning to face the two officers. His voice was sharp, cutting. "This man saved over 40 American soldiers on a mission no one even dares talk about. He doesn't need defending, but I sure as hell won't stand by and watch this." The atmosphere shifted instantly. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, a wave of low grumbles and sharp whispers. Jason Monroe tightened his grip on the citation pad. Tyler Hayes gave a strained, awkward smile, but the swagger they carried at the start had clearly begun to crumble. And right at that moment, the low rumble of an engine sounded from afar. A sleek black SUV, government plates glinting under the sun, sped toward the scene and came to a precise stop right at the curb. The car door swung open, and this time, it wasn't just the locals who held their breath. Even the police officers froze. A tall man stepped out, clad in dusty-colored combat fatigues. The four shining silver stars on his collar left no room for doubt. General David Rourke, one of the most powerful figures at the Pentagon. His eyes swept quickly over the scene, locking onto Walter Ramsey. The entire atmosphere shifted. The balance of power on that hot morning turned on its head. And those who had swaggered just moments ago, began to realize they had made a mistake far bigger than anything they had ever encountered. The air turned heavy, almost frozen. Jason Monroe and Tyler Hayes instinctively took a step back, their hands tightening on their belts, faces flushed with confusion. Across the street, the crowd buzzed, and dozens of phones shot up into the air like a swarm of fireflies, flashing nonstop. General Rourke didn't waste a glance around. He walked straight toward Walter Ramsey, who still sat calmly on the curb, his weathered hands loosely holding that worn-out cap on his knees. Stopping in front of the old man, the general bowed slightly, his voice deep and clear, cutting through the stifling afternoon heat. Sergeant Major Walter Ramsey, the man who taught me how to survive, how to fight, and most importantly, how to be a man. A simple sentence, yet it struck like a silent earthquake, shaking every heartbeat around them. General Rourke turned, his eyes sharp as a blade slicing through Jason Monroe and Tyler Hayes. "You two just stopped and humiliated a man who saved an entire platoon trapped deep in the Panamanian jungle in 1985, he said, his voice not loud, but as unyielding as steel. Jason opened his mouth, fumbling for a defense, but the words died in his throat. Tyler could only gulp, his entire body stiff as though standing trial before an invisible military court. But General Rourke wasn't done yet. "He's the reason I'm alive today to wear this 4th star," the general said, lightly tapping his shoulder. When everyone else dropped to their knees in fear, he stood up. When we lost hope, he rekindled it. The general stepped forward, extending his hand to Walter. Not a casual handshake, but the firm, resolute grip reserved only for true warriors. Walter Ramsey slowly rose to his feet, his once slouched frame straightening, solid, as if he were still in uniform. They clasped hands tightly, no words needed. Around them, the once chattering crowd fell into an awed, reverent silence. The kids holding their phones stopped recording. A veteran in the crowd, wearing a frayed old shirt, straightened his posture and raised his hand in a military salute. Another followed, then another. Within seconds, the corner of Elmwood and Grant had transformed into an impromptu ceremony of honor. No flags, no trumpets, no loudspeakers, only gazes full of reverence and silent salutes. General Rourke turned to Tyler and Jason, his voice ice cold. "You think you know about honor, about duty? You don't even know who you're standing in front of." Jason struggled to stammer. We were just following procedure." General Rourke didn't even crack a smile. "Procedure doesn't teach you how to see a soldier's heart. If you have a shred of decency left, you will apologize, not just with words, but with your actions." Walter Ramsey only shook his head lightly, rejecting any display of grandeur. The old man pulled his weathered cap back over his head, the same cap that had traveled with him through burning deserts, blood-soaked jungles, and now, through the bitter neglect of the modern world. And just like that, a silent legend was recognized, not through glittering medals, but through the purest form of human respect. The noonday sun blazed down on Maple Street, but the air around them seemed frozen, weighed heavy by the truth just revealed. General David Rourke turned to face the crowd, his voice deep and deliberate, as if he wanted every word to etch itself into the minds of those present. Walter Ramsey is not just a veteran. He led operations so critical we still can't write them into history books. A soft ripple of shock coursed through the crowd. In 1975, Rourke continued. He led the rescue team at Phnom Penh, freeing 14 hostages held by the Khmer Rouge, in conditions where survival odds were less than 10%. A woman in the crowd covered her mouth with her hand. A middle-aged man whipped his baseball cap off his head and bowed deeply in silence. In 1983, General Rourke said, his voice rolling like the first rumble of a summer storm, Walter volunteered to return to Colombia. In an unofficial rescue mission, he got an entire U.S. medical team out of a siege without losing a single life. Jason Monroe stood frozen. The citation pen slipped from his hand and hit the asphalt without him even noticing. After September 11th, Rourke continued. When many thought they had done enough, Walter Ramsey, already over 60 years old, volunteered to return and train special operations units. The survival techniques he taught for urban and deep jungle environments are still saving young soldiers' lives today. No one dared to interrupt. No one even whispered. On the old pickup truck, the sunlight glinted off the faded lettering. U.S. Army Special Forces veteran. The very words Jason and Tyler had mocked that morning. An elderly man in a plaid shirt stood at the edge of the street, his trembling hand raised in a crisp military salute. Across the street, a little girl around 7 or 8 tugged at her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mom, is he a real hero?" The mother squeezed her daughter's hand tightly and nodded, eyes brimming with tears. General Rourke pulled out a thick black folder and handed it directly to Tommy Sandoval, the gas station attendant who had quietly alerted Colonel Dawson, who in turn had sounded the alarm to Rourke. Inside this, Rourke said, are records of achievements you won't find in any official book. But without him, many of us standing here today wouldn't be alive. Tyler Hayes, face pale as a sheet, choked out. We didn't know. Walter Ramsey, who had remained silent all this time, now slowly lifted his cap and returned a salute. A salute not demanding recognition, but simply acknowledging genuine respect. General Rourke turned to the young officers. "And that," he said, "is your first lesson about honor. Not every hero wears a new uniform, but every noble heart leaves a mark." A soft breeze swept down Elmwood and Grant, lifting golden leaves into the air, as if time itself was whispering a reminder that sometimes the greatest among us walk silently beside us, unseen. Walter Ramsey bowed his head quietly, not from shame, not from pain, but from the quiet pride of a life lived, fought, and given freely without ever demanding a word of acknowledgement. The forecourt of the gas station fell into a solemn hush. Only the soft rustle of the wind flipping the pages of the folder in Tommy Sandoval's hands could be heard, as if history itself was murmuring secrets long neglected. Tyler Hayes and Jason Monroe, the two young officers who had strutted so arrogantly just moments ago, now stood in stunned silence, unable to meet Walter Ramsey's gaze. After a few seconds that felt like a century, Tyler stepped forward. His voice was rough. "Mr. Rams, we sincerely apologize for the way we treated you." Jason quickly nodded, his face flushed red. "We were wrong. We acted like fools." Walter looked at the two young men, his gaze neither angry nor bitter. He simply nodded, like a man who had witnessed far too many mistakes, far too many late apologies. "I accept your apology," Walter replied, his voice low and steady. "But you need to remember this." He paused for a moment, letting his words settle into the heavy air. "Respect must come first, not after you find out who someone is." A cold breeze swept down the street, carrying with it a thin layer of dust and fallen leaves. The two officers bowed their heads, shame evident in every movement. Suddenly, from the far edge of the crowd, the distinct clicks of a camera shutter echoed. A local journalist, who had only come hoping to catch a few mundane snapshots in a sleepy town, had just captured the moment. But this time, the lens didn't record a wrongful arrest. It captured a deeper lesson: humility. General Rourke, standing nearby with arms crossed over his chest, let his razor-sharp gaze sweep over the two officers. "Do you know why the military teaches us to salute everyone in uniform, no matter their rank?" Tyler shook his head. "Because we're not saluting the person," Rourke said, voice low and firm. "We salute the ideals they represent. Just like in life, you need to learn to salute a person's dignity before you salute their title." Silence fell once again, this time not from awkwardness, but from reflection. Walter adjusted the brim of his worn cap, then slowly stepped forward toward the two officers. He extended his hand, steady and sure. Tyler hesitated for just a second, then grasped Walter's hand firmly. Jason followed, his palms sweaty but sincere. "Learn," Walter said, his smile thin and fleeting like a passing breeze. "And teach it to those who come after you." Down the street, a small pickup truck had just pulled over. In the bed were wooden planks, screws, and a weathered wooden sign that read, "Ramsey Home Repairs." no charge for veterans. The locals began to gather around. No one saw Walter as just an old man in a beat-up truck anymore. From that day on, they saw something different, a living monument walking quietly among them. And for the first time that day, on Walter Ramsey's weathered face, a true smile appeared. Not because his reputation had been restored, not because old medals had been dusted off and displayed, but because he knew that in the eyes of the next generation, a seed of respect, humility, and gratitude had been planted. And this time, it would take root firmly. Within just 3 days after the incident at the gas station, the story of Walter Ramsey spread through Silver Creek like wildfire through dry grass. Local newspapers ran front-page headlines, "The Silent Veteran, a living legend among us." Social media exploded with photos of Walter shaking hands with the 2 young officers, along with a video of General Rourke saluting him in the middle of the street. Not long after, Mayor Vivian Clark convened a special meeting at City Hall. In a packed chamber, she declared, her voice thick with emotion, "We cannot let someone like Walter Ramsey be remembered by just a few news articles. He built a better community with 2 hands and a heart that never asked for anything in return." The entire hall rose in a standing ovation. Right then and there, the City Council unanimously voted to establish the Ramsey Freedom Initiative, a large-scale project aimed at building accessibility ramps for the disabled throughout Silver Creek and surrounding towns. The initial donations far exceeded expectations. Over $200,000 raised within just 48 hours. And it didn't stop there. The council also officially declared June 5th, the day of the incident, as Walter Ramsey Day every year. That morning, Walter was invited to Central Square. He stood under the broad shade of an ancient oak tree, the same worn cloth cap resting over his silver hair. No microphone, no grand podium, just him, simple as he had always lived, and the entire town gathered around. General Rourke, dressed in plain civilian clothes, stepped forward to speak. Some people are honored with monuments of marble, but Walter Ramsey has built his monument in the hearts of those he touched. When the bronze plaque bearing the name Ramsey Freedom Initiative was unveiled next to the City Hall courtyard, the crowd erupted into applause. Amid the breeze, amid the laughter and the tears, a group of veterans and high school students clasped hands, signing a pledge to volunteer on the first construction projects. Walter simply smiled softly and nodded quietly. In his eyes, there was no pride for himself, only a steady belief that a seed he had quietly planted was now beginning to sprout, growing stronger than he had ever dared to hope. From the first Walter Ramsey Day onward, the town of Silver Creek was never quite the same. At the Silver Creek Police Department, a quiet but significant change began to take root. The one who initiated it was none other than Lieutenant Jason Monroe, one of the 2 officers who had once detained Walter that day. With the approval of Chief Dalton, a new module was added to the rookie training curriculum. Seminar, Lessons from Walter Ramsey. Every new officer, during their first week on duty, was required to sit in the briefing room and flip through a slim but weighty file. Walter's biography, his medals, records of classified missions, and the countless acts of silent volunteer work he had carried out for the community over the decades. Attached to the file was an old black-and-white photograph. A young Walter in uniform, a calm, resolute look in his eyes, the look of someone who had stared down nameless, unrecorded challenges. At the start of every new training session, Lieutenant Monroe would begin with the same words. If you can't recognize a hero by the kindness in their eyes, you have no business carrying a badge. There are no tests, no grades, only a heavy silence after each session, as rookies carefully folded away the file as if holding something sacred. Near the exit of the police department courtyard, a new plaque was mounted. Respect doesn't need a reason. Give before you expect it in return. Walter Ramsey. And so, the seed Walter planted that day quietly spread through Silver Creek, from the dusty back roads to the once indifferent hearts of its people. Summer in Silver Creek passed in a blaze of bright mornings and peaceful, drowsy afternoons. At the corner of Elmwood and Grant, The familiar low rumble of an old engine could once again be heard every day. The faded blue Chevy truck of Walter Ramsey rumbled slowly through the streets. The bed was still loaded with planks of wood, cement, and battered tools, the humble weapons for the quiet battles he never abandoned. Building ramps for the disabled, repairing homes for the lonely, fixing roofs for crumbling shelters. Walter never waited for recognition. He never had. But Silver Creek had changed. Whether it was the postal worker, the corner store owner, or the patrol officer, whenever they heard the sputtering engine of that old Chevy, they all did the same thing. They stopped, removed their hats, or stood up straight, offering a formal military salute. No one had ordered them to. No regulation required it. It was simply pride rising naturally, the way a national flag stirs the heart of an old soldier until it trembles. Walter, as always, simply pressed the gas pedal gently, his eyes focused ahead, never seeking anyone's gaze. Inside the truck, the passenger seat still held an old file folder, a few battered tools, and a faded photograph, a picture of him with the young soldiers he had once led through moments the world would never hear about. A young boy stood at the edge of the sidewalk, clutching his baseball cap tightly, looking up, his eyes shining. No one told him to show respect. He just knew it was the right thing to do. Walter Ramsey, a man as quiet as the wind, yet leaving the most enduring trails of light across the sky of a small town's memory. Because some heroes don't need medals. They don't need a stage. They just live with kindness. And that is enough.